John,
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, good evening, Democrats.
Oh, you forgot to tell us to unmute.
Everybody on Zoom, let's hear you unmute. We want to hear everybody nice and loud. Chit chat in the back of the room. Let's keep it down. Here we go. One more time. Good evening,
Good
Democrats.
evening, Democrats.
Good evening,
All right, that
Democrats.
was a nice, loud, rowdy, and raucous Democratic welcome. So thanks, everybody. Now, Zoom, we're putting you back on mute again.
All right.
Mute. Oh, okay. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the meeting. In here, out there, it's election season in Santa Monica. We're glad to have everybody here. We have made our endorsements. Some of those candidates are here today. Ladies and gentlemen, raise your hand if you're a candidate in Santa Monica. Look how many hands are up. And I'm going to turn it around. So keep the hands up so everyone online can see. We got a nice turnout. We have all four of our city council candidates: Alice, Natalia, Barry, Dan. We have Margaret here. We have Jen Smith. We have Phyllis. We have Kay. So thanks for being here. Did I miss anyone? Okay, so thanks everybody for being here. And I want to make sure you know, almost all the candidates are here with their nomination papers, getting their last few signatures before they turn it into the clerk. So if you are a Santa Monica resident, or in the case of the school and college board or Malibu resident, please come and see the candidates in the back of the room and help them out. Because on Monday, the city council change slate candidates announced that they're running for re-election: Phil Brock, Oscar De La Torre, and Christine Parra. So we're heading for a really competitive election this year. It's time to get to work. And the first GOTV opportunities are coming up this Saturday. Dan Hall and Ellis Raskin have both announced their first canvassing events Saturday morning at 10 a.m. with more shifts throughout the day. I'll be there at noon for my shift. Please talk to Dan or Ellis if you would like to be there, or take a look at our email that goes out tomorrow. We'll have a link to it. We're going to keep on sending out information as we learn about it. And candidates, if you have an event that you want our members to come to, let me know. We'll put it in our email list. Our next meeting is August 28th. We'll be considering all of the ballot measures statewide, countywide, and local. Isabel Story and Lynn Cervini are working on getting speakers for and against all of the measures, and then we'll vote to endorse for or against all of them. Another measure just got added today from the county level. We'll be talking all about it next meeting. Last meeting was an interesting time. The date of the meeting was June 26th. And that was exactly one night before the debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Did anyone see it? Anyone see the debate? So it's been a really emotional month for Democrats. A lot of ups and downs. We started with the debate performance from Joe Biden. Some of you were here at Barney's Beanery. I was watching the debate live at Barney's, and it was a drag. It wasn't, I mean, people were drinking, but not for the usual reason. Then, not much later than that, we had an assassination attempt on Donald Trump, which was a really tough day for all of Americans. And I mean, it was really difficult for Democrats because, you know, we have so much animus toward this guy, but he still is an assassination. And what's the emotions with that? It was very difficult to process. And then a few days later, there was the Republican convention, and the Republicans were really organized and lined up and enthusiastic, and they put on a great convention for the first time that I've ever seen. And they selected their VP choice, JD Vance. Personally, I think he should just stay on his couch. But we had followed that, but all this endless speculation. What is the party going to do? Is Joe Biden going to stay in the race? Is he going to drop out? Every day, more and more people were coming out saying that he had to drop out. The party, I'm not going to lie, was as divided as it's ever been. It was a really tough few weeks. And then on July 21st, President Biden announced he was dropping out of the race, and an hour later, he endorsed Vice President Harris. And what has happened, yeah, round of applause. What has happened since then has been like, I have not seen the Democratic Party like this since 2008. It is, the momentum is so strong. The party is unified. I was worried before this happened that what if Joe Biden dropped out and you started having people challenging Harris, and we had a really tough couple, months going into the convention, and there's a floor fight. None of that, it's over. We're seeing everybody from all the way from, Joe Manchin type Democrats, all the way to Bernie Sanders type Democrats are excited, and they can't wait to support Kamala Harris for president. Now, the last couple of days, the polls are coming back and they are showing what we needed to see. We are seeing Kamala Harris ahead in almost every single swing state. And it's only been such a small amount of time since, what's this?
Is this Eric?
Yeah, so you can, just tell them to, it's the same link. Yeah, it's the same link. Sorry, technical issue there. So we're seeing so much excitement, enthusiasm. It's showing up in the polls. And I'm telling you, by next week, the polls are going to be even higher because there's a lag effect. You don't get to see the polls show up for a couple of weeks for various reasons we won't get into right now. But you know what? The most encouraging thing to me about all of this is that the party listened to us. The party heard what the people were saying, and they didn't double down like the Republicans are doing, and they didn't insist that they were doing it the right way. And we've seen that before from the party. We've seen it all the time from the other side. But this time, the Democratic Party heard the people, and they made the change to give us the opportunity to win this election. And it's going to make all the difference. That is where we come in. The top of the party listened to us, and now it's our turn to repay the favor to Vice President Harris, to Jamie Harrison, to Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, Nancy Pelosi, Adam Schiff, and all these people who are working behind the scenes to give us the opportunity to win the election. Now it's our turn. So Natalia, if you could pull up the logo for the headquarters, the West Side Democratic headquarters, that's been our home for this activism work outside of Santa Monica for many election cycles. And oh yeah, I can get you. Yeah. So, where are you? What? Okay, got it. Okay, so we have our West Side Democratic headquarters. The logo used to be the Congress, used to be Congress. And we've got the Capitol building. We've got a new logo. We're going to debut it right now. No one's seen it yet. Well, except for, there we go. So this is our new logo, West Side Democratic headquarters. We got the donkey, we got our coconut trees. We're ready to go. We're ready to go. And the headquarters, we have 96 days until election day. We have to keep the White House and the Senate and flip the House. We have swing districts throughout California that we need to either keep blue or flip blue. And our partners at the West Side Democratic headquarters are gearing up, and they're about to launch our new headquarters location. It hasn't been announced yet. I'm breaking news right now. The West Side Democratic headquarters location is 1241 3rd Street Promenade right here in Santa Monica. That's on the promenade between Arizona and Wilshire. I have to say, they picked a great location for me personally. It's only a few blocks from where I live. And we're going to open our doors during the DNC, the last night of the DNC, when Vice President Harris accepts the nomination. We're going to have a watch party. And we're going to watch her accept the nomination from our new headquarters. I know that they just purchased a life-size cardboard cutout of Kamala Harris, so you'll be able to take your selfies with her. And more information is coming by email. So if you get our emails, you'll find out about more information about it. If not, you'll get the emails after today. Okay, so come to that event. It's going to be on August 22nd. And then we're going to be going from there. We're going to be sending vans and buses and all to all the swing districts, George Whitesides and Dave Min and all of our districts nearby. We're going to get them all to become Democratic districts. And in order to do it, we have to raise some money. So let's go to the fundraiser graphic now. The headquarters, the West Side Democratic headquarters is having a fundraiser. That's okay. It's coming up. We're having a fundraiser on August 11th, 4 to 6 p.m. at Manchego on Main Street. We're going to be joined by Tony Thurmond, Assemblymember Rick Chavez-Burr, and Congresswoman Sydney Kamlager are all going to be there. Plus, we're going to announce more names soon. So do you have the link from that you can put in the chat? It's in the email, I think, that I sent this to you on. Okay, so we're gonna get that emailed out tomorrow. We want everyone to come to our fundraiser so we can have the funds that we need to do all that work. And now let's culminate everything we're just talking about in the vote that we need to take. This club already endorsed President Biden for re-election. Now that that's not happening anymore, the endorsement's been vacated. So we need to re-endorse for president. Hopefully it shouldn't take too long. Does anyone want to make a motion? Barry Snell made the motion and Janice Schnittman seconded.
John, since the motion is made and seconded, I want to point out that this is a national election, and so members of the club who don't live in Santa Monica are eligible to vote
right.
on this question.
Everybody who lives in the United States can vote in this one. Can you take down the that's true, yeah. Okay, so now let's take a look at everybody on the Zoom. Everybody who would like to vote yes to endorse Kamala Harris, please raise your hand. Okay. When Natalia is counting, it looks like we have 8, 9, yeah, we have 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. We have 20 on Zoom. How are we doing in person? Okay, so let's put that at 46, yes. And now everyone put your hands down. Everybody who wants to vote no on this endorsement. Just put your hands down. I'm assuming that, okay, there we go. All right, so any abstentions? All right, so unanimous vote. We did it. We endorsed Kamala Harris, and I would also add, hopefully, if anyone objects to this, I should have said it before, but if anyone objects, we'll take a second vote on it. But I would like to amend that obviously we're also endorsing whoever Kamala Harris selects as her VP. That's part of the endorsement.
Okay, John, someone named Eric just entered the room. FYI.
Great. Well, I can see that he's on. So hi, Congressman. So we're going to go to you in just a moment. Okay, so now we have so Congressman, what you just missed is we just endorsed Kamala Harris for president. So we have 2 great panel discussions tonight. We're going to do policy deep dives on 2 really important issues which highlight the stakes for the election. First, we're going to discuss the state of reproductive rights 2 years after the Dobbs decision overturned Roe v. Wade. And second, we'll consider Project 2025, which is the Republican playbook that outlines the Trump agenda for a second term and how they are systematically going to dismantle American democracy and radically remake our government by consolidating power into the executive branch. Before we bring in our panelists, though, we have a special guest to weigh in on these topics and more. So to introduce our first guest, please welcome our communications VP and who has now also been elected as the corresponding secretary for the LA County recording secretary for the LA County Democratic Party, Susan Chu.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. And thank you, Congressman, for joining us. I'm very honored to have him with us. He's a good friend of ours, of mine, and my friend Dana, who's in the audience as well. And I'm going to just read his bio because basically if I were extemporaneously talking, I would just be like, he's great, he's great, he's great. So here's his official bio. Congressman Eric Swalwell was raised in a family of police officers. His father was a cop and his mom ran a small business. They brought him into the world in Sac City, Iowa, and then raised him in Dublin, California, the oldest of 4 boys. His childhood was about family, sports, and hard work, from running a paper route at the age of 10 to sanding and installing window frames as a teenager. A Division I soccer scholarship allowed him to become the first in his family to go to college. While attending the University of Maryland as an undergrad, Eric served as an intern on Capitol Hill for Representative Ellen Tauscher. After graduating from the University of Maryland School of Law, he became a prosecutor in the Alameda County District Attorney's Office, where he led the hate crimes unit. I might add that that's also where our VP got her training, as the Alameda County District Attorney's Office. In 2012, Eric was elected to be a city council member in his hometown of Dublin. As a representative in Washington, Eric has served 8 years on the House Intelligence Committee, where he was the chairman and ranking member overseeing the CIA. On the Intelligence Committee, Eric helped lead the, I'm sorry, I lost my place. On the Intelligence Committee, Eric helped lead the House investigation into Russia's interference in the 2016 election, and later the first and second impeachments of Donald Trump. As a member of the House Democrats leadership team, Eric was on the House floor on January 6, 2021. A week after the attack, Eric was appointed as a House impeachment manager for the former president's Senate trial. In 2020, he authored the book Endgame, an inside look at what happened in the months leading up to and during the impeachment of Donald Trump and what it means for our nation's immediate future. In an attempt to intimidate and silence Eric from speaking out about the dangers to democracy from the MAGA members of Congress, Speaker McCarthy stripped Eric of his Intelligence Committee assignment in 2023. Only he and Eric Swalwell, I believe, and Congressman Schiff had that dubious honor. Eric was a candidate for president in the 2020 election, running primarily on the issue of ending gun violence. He qualified to participate in the first presidential debate in June 2019 in Miami. Eric currently serves on the House Judiciary and Homeland Security Committees. He's also chairman emeritus and founder of Future Forum, a group of young Democratic members focused on issues and opportunities for millennial Americans. Eric is founder and co-chair of the Bipartisan Critical Materials Caucus and Personalized Medicine Caucus. Every day, Eric strives to make sure if you work hard, it adds up to doing better for yourself and dreaming bigger for your family. He's the his wife is Brittany, and she's a small business owner in hospitality, and they have 3 lovely young kids named Nelson, Cricket, and Hank. And the kids are growing up as Democrats, despite the fact that Congressman Swalwell was born into a family of Republicans. Welcome, Congressman.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Susan, John, and Dana is a dear friend, and so is Amanda Rykoff, who's got the best biscuit recipe in California. If she hasn't made those for you yet, please make her do that. But I don't know about you all. I've gotten the best sleep over the last 10 days. I know we're not sleeping too much. We're still working, but I feel very good about where we are going over the next 97 days and who's going to take us there. And that's who you just endorsed, our Madam Vice President, our MVP, Kamala Harris. I'm just so thrilled that she is our candidate. First, though, I do want to just say that we are so grateful to Joe Biden. And as we agonized over, that debate night, and what we were going to do, and many of us, arrived at what should be done in different ways and with different outcomes in our mind. Every single one of us knew that whatever Joe Biden decided, he would decide it differently than Donald Trump. He would put country over self. And Donald Trump always puts self over everything else. And that's exactly what he did. And so Joe Biden will be remembered with Kamala Harris as his partner as somebody who built the roads that our kids will drive on, created the jobs that will feed their families, and manufactured the chips that will power all of their devices. That's going to be Joe Biden's legacy. And while we will certainly remember Joe Biden for the 16 million jobs that he created forever in American history, we will be grateful to him for the one job that he left. And so Joe Biden goes on the Mount Rushmore of Democratic presidents that include, of course, FDR and John F. Kennedy, Harry Truman, LBJ. 4 people, and now with Joe Biden, who all did not serve for various reasons the full terms that they were eligible to serve. Joe Biden is someone that we all should be grateful to. And he has passed the torch to Kamala Harris. And boy, is she running with it now. I've known Kamala for 20 years. She and I both come from the Alameda County District Attorney's Office. She ran for district attorney across the Bay in San Francisco as someone who was not going to be tough on crime or soft on crime, but smart on crime. 10 years ago, I was fortunate enough to go to Kamala and Doug's wedding. And the Kamala I know is a Kamala who cares. She cares, of course, about her family and her friends, but about her community. She's tough. She's real. She's whip smart. Most importantly, she's ready. But also what we're starting to see, and I think Gen Z sees it even better than we do, she's just fun. And it's refreshing to have somebody running for that office who is serious, but doesn't take herself too seriously. And I've always thought that in politics, just like sports, the team who has the most fun is the team that wins. And we're having fun. And we haven't had fun. It's been very dark thinking about Donald Trump. And now he's on defense. And what we saw today in front of the National Association of Black Journalists is the Trump that we know. He has regressed to the mean. And I mean that as a double entendre. Like, he has gone back to who he is, and he's just mean. And he cannot be the leader of this country ever again. And we're not going back. And so what I'm committed to do is to make sure that we keep the focus on Donald Trump and Trump's Project 2025. And I make sure to always put Trump in front of Project 2025, because he owns this in every single way, no matter how fast he's trying to run away from it. And when these creeps, these 24-karat weirdos, want to suggest that they are pro-family and that a family should have more weight in their vote than a single childless woman, we should take them up on what it means to be pro-family. Because first and foremost, there's nothing pro-family about forcing somebody into a marriage, even if it's a violent relationship, and not allowing them to get out of that marriage. And that's what they would do by banning no-fault divorce. It's also not pro-family to ban same-sex marriages. That's what they're doing with Trump's Project 2025. It's not pro-family if 2 people fall in love and want to have kids and for whatever reason are not able to, and they need the benefit of IVF to do so, and you want to ban IVF. It's not pro-family if that couple gets pregnant and then for a medical reason cannot have the baby, to say, we believe in government mandated pregnancies, and regardless of the health of the mother, you have to have that baby. It's not pro-family if that baby is born and you're not going to give that family a child tax credit or universal childcare, or that you would put the child into a school where the child for the rest of their education life would have to duck and cover for mass shooter drills because you don't know how to protect them. There's nothing pro-family about that. But more basic than anything, just mind your own damn business. It's none of your business why anyone chooses or does not choose to mind your business, but it is your business to enable people to have a freedom to dream. And that's the case that Kamala Harris is going to be making, is that whether it's financial freedom, healthcare freedom, the freedom to breathe clean air, the freedom from gun violence, the freedom to have your vote counted, all of those freedoms are on the line. And we're not just protecting them, we have an opportunity to build upon them. I'm focused, of course, on electing Kamala Harris and whoever the vice presidential candidate is going to be. But we also know we need her to succeed. And for her to succeed, that means she has Hakeem Jeffries as Speaker of the House and that we keep the Senate. That's what she needs to succeed. And a Senate that fixes the filibuster so that we can finally take what Speaker Pelosi passed, the blueprint in her first 2 years of the Biden administration, and finish the job in the Senate on background checks, on the For the People Act that gets rid of dirty money and dirty politics and dirty maps in our government, making sure we put into place Roe v. Wade and its protections. We can do all of that. And so I'm fired up to do it. And we can do it in California. And you know, in Santa Monica, you don't have to go too far to do it. You just have to go a little bit north to help George Whitesides beat Mike Garcia. And you have to go just a little south to help Will Rollins beat Ken Calvert. And you're doing it. And I'm so grateful that you're doing it. So 97 days to go. I'm all in. You're all in. And we're going to have a little fun as we do it. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to John, and I'm happy to answer any questions over the next few minutes before I have to step into another event.
Sure. Well, thanks for your remark. It may be hard to hear, but the folks in the room are giving you a big round of applause right now. And so with the limited time we have left, but thankfully you already addressed a lot of our key points. We're talking tonight after you leave about reproductive rights in the post-Dobbs era. And we're also going to be talking about Project 2025. Now you hit on both of those, but in the time, if you have left, if you want to leave the audience with anything on those two topics to think about as we go, we're going to go deep into the topics, but I want to give you the first chance to weigh in on them.
Yeah, and so again, on Project 2025, I always put Trump in front of it anytime that we talk about it. Also, by the way, when you look at focus groups and what upset them the most about Trump's Project 2025, it's also getting rid of the Department of Education. Again, you cannot be pro-family if you're going to get rid of the Department of Education and expect people to figure it out on their own. And so people with means will be okay, and people who are working to get by will not. And so we need to emphasize that as well. And then on, again, you said Dobbs. I always frame it as Roe, that they robbed us of Roe because we all approach these issues like we approach everything else in life, which is we have a real loss aversion. And so behavioral psychologists will call a loss aversion basically, once we are given something, we will fight like hell to keep it, and we'll be really pissed off when it's taken away. And I'll give you an example. My 7-year-old, is his bedtime goes from 7:30 to 8 o'clock and eventually 8:30. I can always move his bedtime later. I can never move it back. And so you have to think about that, I know, as a parent, that you can always make it a little bit later. You can never take it back. And so when I talk about abortion rights, I frame it as, they robbed us of Roe, so that people understand that they took something away from you. And so that loss aversion mindset really kicks in. And so it's all on the ballot. And I know, as I said, that you're up for doing this. Just one other, unsolicited, I guess, way of messaging that I approach this is also personalize this as much as you can. When you make phone calls and you knock on doors, a lesson I tell myself all the time in messaging is tell me a story or bore me. Meaning we're not electing policies, we're electing people. And so make it personal as to why you're supporting Will Rollins or George Whitesides or Kamala Harris. Just really personalize it, and you'll find that people really key in. And so just do that on your phone banks rather than saying, I'm calling because, Kamala is for abortion rights and Donald Trump has taken it away. Of course, that's the overriding message, but put in there a personal story as to why it matters to you. And I found that that's also so effective. But again, thank you all so much. Thank you, Susan, Dana, and Amanda, and my friends there in the room. I look forward to seeing you all when I'm next down there.
Thank you so much, Congressman. We'll see you on the campaign trail. We got everyone's applauding.
Thank you all.
All right. We'll be seeing Congressman Swalwell on the campaign. I'm sure we'll be seeing him in the districts when we go to knock on doors for the House. We want to put him into the majority and, restore his campaign or his committee assignments. Yeah, Craig, did you have a?
The momentum that I'm seeing, just what is the majority? What is the number majority that the Republicans
I got you.
have?
I got you.
And what would it take to defeat it? And could that be done in California? And then after that, is a supermajority available based on, the groundswell I'm seeing?
We are, I think, the last count was about 4 seats short of the majority right now. It was a really close 2022. And in the time since, we've actually gained in special elections 2 or 3 more seats. So it's really, really close. We only need to pick up a few seats, and a lot of them are right there for the taking. Now, to your point about California, now that we have a California Democrat on top of the ticket for the first time ever, the turnout in California is going to skyrocket. And I think we have the opportunity to flip these seats, George Whitesides and all these other seats that we were talking about. So we're really close. Yes, the majority could be made in California. It is possible that without winning a single other seat, and by the way, New York has a lot of really low-hanging fruit too. But in California, we could win all 4 seats right here, and we could take the majority back. So the super majority is not going to happen, but in the Senate, same thing. I mean, you need 60. I mean, we had it for like 5 minutes until Ted Kennedy died in 2009. So, we have to do some Senate reform to be able to. We need to eliminate the filibuster. I mean, that's the real thing. That's actually probably easier than winning 60 seats. So so we've got a lot of work to do, but we're gonna do it because this is such an important election for us. We always say it's the most important election of our lifetime, and I used to roll my eyes and think that was sort of a cynical remark. And what I've realized is it is true, because every election that happens becomes more important than the last one. We're building on what we've done. We have to keep our wins. We have to stop the Republican Party is getting more and more extreme. So this is the most important election, and we've got a lot of work to do. Tonight's meeting is all about the stakes of this election. We're going to have 2 panel discussions on these 2 topics that we mentioned already that are ultimately really tightly connected. Project 2025 is all about the Republican attempts to control our lives by consolidating power. And a crucial part of that effort is their long-time goal of controlling women and their bodies and their autonomy. So we're going to start by looking at reproductive rights, and later we're going to zoom out to the broader discussion of Project 2025 and what Trump's second-term agenda will look like. Would look like. It won't look like it because it's not going to happen.
Well, for those of us who had that, what section is that in the project?
We'll be talking about it in detail. We'll be talking about it in detail. But first, we're going to just talk about reproductive rights as a whole, and we're going to welcome our first set of guests. Please welcome Amanda Smith, the founder of Beverly Hills for Choice. Yeah, grab a seat over here. Yeah, you might want to go the other way. Yeah. Aileen Ariano, the Southern California organizer from Reproductive Freedom for All, formerly known as NARAL. And also joining us by Zoom, Sylvia Gazarian, the executive director of the Santa Monica-based Women's Reproductive Rights Assistance Project. You on there? There she is. And Sylvia is also the former chair of Santa Monica's Commission on the Status of Women, which was unfortunately eliminated due to budget cuts. Hopefully that commission will be reinstated one day. And she's also an official friend of the Santa Monica Democratic Club because she joined us for a similar panel that we did back in 2021. So we've got a lot to cover here tonight. So I don't think you should spotlight it because then people on Zoom won't be able to see everyone else. So at home, you're going to want to go to speaker view, not gallery view. Okay, so before we get into the specifics, I want to ask each of you for your thoughts on the big picture question, which is we're 2 years removed from the Dobbs decision, which means Democrats, Republicans, and everyday people have had time to adjust to this new reality that we're in. We've seen Republicans vowing to outlaw abortion nationally, and we've seen Democrats promising to codify Roe legislatively. So I want to ask each of you your overall analysis of how things have changed since the Dobbs decision and where we are today. And we'll go to, okay. Yeah. Let's start with Aileen. And I'm going to move the camera to everybody so that in a moment you'll be able to see our panelists.
Hi everyone, thank you for your time today. Formerly NARAL pro-choice. And I would say what we've seen in the past 2 years is on paper, we have seen 21 states with abortion bans. They all look a little different. Some are total abortion bans, some have exceptions. But we've seen data and research show that they've had very real consequences, right? In the last year alone, I think travel went up like 15 to 20% for folks who travel to receive an abortion. And really that's looking like at the bright side of things, right? Because when we think about folks who live, for example, in the South, all the states surrounding them also have abortion bans. And so like when you think of just like an everyday person who needs an abortion, lives in the South, what does it mean for them to have to travel hundreds of miles, to take time off from work, to go to a state where they can get an abortion, pay for a hotel and then fly back home? This is something that's really not accessible for a lot of folks that are hard hit by these abortion bans, marginalized communities. And so that's one reality we're living with. A very shocking and disturbing statistic that has come out of research is that in the past year alone, over 65,000 rape-related pregnancies have come out since Dobbs, which is terrifying. And of course, again, this is impacting a lot of vulnerable communities. And so that's kind of one side of what we're seeing, right? On the flip side, I think something that's been very great to see is that people have scrambled into action, right? So for example, California is one of the states that enabled the SHIELD law. And so this really protected providers. Last year, Senator Skinner and a lot of other legislators passed legislation that allows providers from other states to come and practice here. And so for some providers in other states, that was like a big concern, right? Will I be penalized if I provide my patients with abortion care? And so that's one step that many states took to make sure that if folks cross state lines to get abortion access, or providers are looking to help folks out of state, that they feel comfortable doing that they don't feel that they will, end up in jail or something like that. Something with severe consequences. And I think the one other great thing we've seen is that every single time that abortion is on the ballot, it wins every single time. And so we're hoping to see that as well this coming year, right? We have a couple states that have ballots on there. initiatives on their ballots, Arizona, Nevada, a couple more. And so that should, really speak to us and show us that the majority of Americans do believe in legal, safe access to abortion care. That's the reality, not Project 2025, not whatever Republicans are pushing. The reality is that every time it's on the ballot, it wins, and it wins by a landslide. So I would say that's like a bit of an overview of what we're looking at. And I think especially now that we have Vice President Harris as a presidential nominee, she's someone who has really embraced, been a champion for reproductive freedom during her career. She's been doing a reproductive freedom tour these last couple months. And so this is something that in our movement we see as, a really great thing. And we're really looking forward to having her in office in November.
Hi, my name is Amanda. I am one of the co-founders. There's four co-founders I'm representing tonight of BH for Choice. And first, I just want to thank you guys so much. The club has been amazing and such a wonderful supporter of what we've been doing in Beverly Hills. I can't speak to the global picture or the national picture. This isn't my career or anything I do professionally. And that's why it's so wonderful to have people who actually know what they're talking about to give the actual facts while I say how it feels. And I'm coming at it from the same place I think everybody on the other side of this table is, which is, a mix of extreme hope in the last 2 years and a mix of hope and fear, right? And there were great things happening in terms of Prop 1. But for me, what's become very scary is the counter side that we've seen. As John had said, I am one of the founders of BH for Choice, and we've been investigating and trying to bring to light allegations that an abortion clinic offering abortion throughout pregnancy was possibly shuttered before it was set to open because of collusion between the city of Beverly Hills and extremists. So for me, on the one hand, watching people come out for abortion in every state across the board, it's been incredible. Watching the fact that people are turning around and saying, we're not going to let a panel of 6 men or 5 men and Amy Coney Barrett determine what the rest of us can do with our bodies and how we can access medical care. That's incredible. But what has been very scary for me is to see in the last 10 months how even as we the people stand up and protect our rights, enshrining it with Prop 1, doing all these different things, coming out to vote, these extremists are so emboldened now that they really feel they can go through back routes and just speak one-to-one to a mayor, to a council member, and they'll see the light because those people will really know what the will of the people is, not the voices of the people. So that's where I'm coming, and that's completely anecdotal, but that's where I am. So let's hear from people who know what they're talking about.
And Sylvia, you want to remark on that?
Yes. Hi, everybody. John, do you think you can put up page 6 or 5 that shows the US map?
Sure, 1 second.
That would give a reality check for everybody. It was just updated on July 29th. And it's a US map showing the abortion policies in effect as this week.
Oh, yeah, hold on, we're pulling it up now.
Okay. Not that one.
I believe in you.
Thank you for helping out and thank you for having me.
Oh my goodness, why is that so?
Okay. There we go.
There we are. So in answering this question, I just want to start out and echo everything that the other panelists have said, but say that we are in a public health crisis right now, yet we know that abortion is a winning issue, and we see it with everything that's happening in various states. I'm not going to elaborate on all of that right now because I know our time is limited, but since the Dobbs decision, which overturned Roe, there have been significant changes in reproductive rights in the United States. Many states have enacted abortion laws and restrictive abortion laws. And many don't recognize that there are up to 22 states now that have bans or restrictions in play. RAP is the largest national independent abortion fund. We fund abortions in all 50 states. And we know firsthand, grassroots down to what is happening in each of these states. And I will tell you right now, our reality is that in the last 3 years, travel has increased significantly. You know, 3 years ago, people were traveling, it was 24%. Then it rose to 38%. Last year, it was 49%. And just before this call, I took a survey of where we are now through July this year in terms of funding abortion for patients across the US. And we are at 62% of patients having to travel out of state to receive abortion care. And that should give you an idea of where we are in this mess. You know, there are many barriers in access to care since Roe was overturned. We have over 70 clinic closures. RAP works with over 700 clinics, doctors, and hospitals across the US. And just as Roe was overturned, a number of these clinics have had to close. Other things that are happening that people may not recognize is that a number of doctors can no longer advise patients, particularly in banned states. Why? Because they're scared that they are going to be criminalized. They're going to have fines set against them. And so as a doctor, imagine the perspective of not being able to help patients. This is where we are right now. Other things are the US has the highest maternal mortality rate for a developed country. And recent studies now show that there's a substantial increase in the states with bans and restrictions. So, while we have tremendous hope as to what's happening, and abortion is a winning issue, our reality right now are those factors that I just mentioned.
Thank you, Sylvia. And before we go on to the next question, Aileen, did you have some slides you wanted to show too?
Yeah, start slide 2.
Okay, we're going to go to slide 2.
This one moment just to get it shared.
Yeah, this first slide is just like an overview of different terminology that I feel like it's good to be familiarized with in the reproductive space. But we could go to slide 2 if you'd like. Okay, yeah. So I wanted to quickly just talk a bit more about how California's landscape is tied to the national landscape. So as Amanda mentioned, we see like an emerging like group of folks trying to really implement an anti-choice agenda at every level. So of course, at the Supreme Court level, national level, and even here in California, we're seeing at the local level. So for example, in Beverly Hills with the DuPont Clinic, which is an all-trimester clinic, there was a lot of like behind the scenes things going on, very shady. And as you can see here with the headlines, it's also happening in other parts of California, most recently actually in Fontana, which is in San Bernardino County. Planned Parenthood was ready to open a clinic, and then similar to the DuPont Clinic, they didn't allow it to open. They put in place a moratorium, and just last week, it was extended for a whole other year. And so of course, this is not a question of funding or if they had permission. It's just things happening at the local level between local leaders. And this is, I think, just really illustrates the fact that folks can really implement an anti-choice agenda at any level, and we have to do everything we can
the way Beverly Hills for Choice is doing in making sure that we're holding folks accountable. And that looks like a variety of things, right? But these are folks we elect into office, and so they have no right to be stripping us of these services that are essential healthcare. Especially a Planned Parenthood representative came to speak to our membership, and she was sharing how, you know, a lot of folks just assume Planned Parenthood clinics only do abortions or only do things related to reproductive health care. But Fontana in particular is one of the cities in California that has like a very high rate of STI and STD contraction, and also has just overall lower access to quality healthcare. And so what a lot of folks are not seeing is that by stripping away abortion access, they're also stripping away folks from just essential healthcare access related to sexual and reproductive healthcare. And so this is just the trend we're seeing, and I encourage folks to do their research, support local organizing groups, support Planned Parenthood, and really apply the pressure to these local representatives and get them out of office. And the other thing I wanted to mention, which was mentioned several times tonight, is that really the path to the House runs through California. A lot of people assume, right, we have Prop 1 passed, we're a blue state, our work here is done, like let's turn to another state. But really one thing that's essential for folks to understand is we have, I think, more than 10 seats we can flip here in California, as mentioned. George Whitesides, Will Rawlins, Adam Gray up in Merced. We also have a seat we want to keep, Katie Porter's seat in Orange County. Dave Min is running for that seat. And so we have a lot of work we can do to really make sure that once we get Kamala Harris into office, we also have a majority in the House, and then we're able to restore abortion rights for everyone in this country. So I really encourage you, when you're at the doors and folks feel like, well, it's California, you know, we're going to vote for Kamala anyway, we have a Democratic majority, that you remind folks that their vote for Congress really can make a huge impact on everyone else around this country. And if abortion access is something they care about, then their vote for George Whitesides, for Will Rawlins, for whoever it is that's running on the Democratic ticket can really make a difference, and California can make all the change for the House. So yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to touch on in terms of California.
Thank you. So we're definitely coming back to talk about Beverly Hills for Choice in just a minute, but just wanted to stick on the 2024 election theme for a moment. We have obviously two radically different approaches to this topic on the ballot. Donald Trump, who's talked about punishing women who've had abortions, and his running mate, J.D. Vance, who's still, as of today, talking about doubling down this view that women who don't have children are childless cat ladies, and that he actually said that they should have less of a vote than women who are in traditional, you know, heterosexual marriages with children. You know, the less said about J.D. Vance, the better, I guess, but on the other side, we have Kamala Harris would be the first woman president and called to restore Roe v. Wade. We know that this issue was deeply animating and effective in the 2022 midterms. How do you think it's going to affect the presidential race? Anybody wants to start? We'll go to you to start. Sure.
Yeah. This is actually something I do feel qualified to talk about, as the kind of childless cat lady that J.D. Vance is afraid of. I think the dual, like the fact that we're looking at Kamala Harris, a potential woman as president, and the first Black woman as president, and all these different things, dovetailing with the fact that we're also, all of us at this point, I think, very much feel that we are fighting for our lives, in particular with the fact that we're losing access to medical procedures. That too, like nothing has made me feel more like I can run through a brick wall like the Kool-Aid man than the past week and a half, and seeing the response, not just from the people who normally vote, which, let's be honest, is not normally the youth demographic, but seeing 18 to 30-year-olds, people who normally do not care and will not get out to vote, suddenly registering, the surge in registrations we've seen, the responses, the way people are, I don't normally think social media is real life, but the way people are interacting with everything that comes out from the Harris campaign, I think this is either one, you know, I love to use the phrase Diana, that, you know, it would have been enough. It would have been enough that Donald Trump had to stare down and JD Vance had to stare down an entire country of angry women and people who need access to abortion. But Diana, it's him also going up against a wildly talented Black woman. It would have been enough. This is on each count something that can beat Donald Trump. The two things combined, Kamala Harris, who says, "Say it to my face," this is as awful as abortion being completely stripped from all of us is. At least we're fighting back and we're being given the opportunity to do it. And I think that's tremendous.
Leah, go ahead.
I agree. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. Sorry about that. I am very optimistic about the turn of events that has happened of late. You know, women have always been strong supporters of bodily autonomy, reproductive justice, but to see the surge in younger voters during this time has been tremendous. I do feel that, you know, people recognizing and understanding what's going on with Project 2025 in particular has been very beneficial. But on a grander scale, you know, when I look at the trajectory of what has happened since the fall of Roe, we had a number of corporations, for example, that came on board right after Roe fell to let their employees know, you know, that they were fighting for them, that they would cover their health insurance and travel costs. One of the other groups that, you know, was coming on board, but not as strongly as it is now, were our male allies. I will say that we have a complete surge and change in the way people are seeing this issue and how it is affecting all of us as humans. So there definitely is a tremendous divide between the two, Trump and Harris, but there's so much positive that is happening because of this information getting out about just how weird Trump and his people are at this point in time, you know? So.
I would just quickly add that to like agree with everything that has been said. And on top of that, VP Harris has visited over 20 states and done over 100 events in the last year, specifically focused on reproductive freedom. And I think, you know, that for us, we're, you know, Biden stepping down is really bittersweet because we get to see the possibility of something I think we didn't really imagine until it was in front of us. But she is unashamed to say the word abortion. She really embraces, you know, everything that she embraces the fight for reproductive freedom. And I think that looks like a good fight ahead of us with a leader like her.
Great. So now let's you know, take a moment to go local for a second. And one of the reasons we even came up with the idea to start to have this topic was because of something that's going on in our own backyard. And it's easy for West Side progressives to think that this issue is something that only affects people who live in the Deep South or Republican controlled states. But in fact, that's not the case. And right here in dark blue, LA County, we have a situation going on that Amanda has been one of the leaders on I want to give you the floor for a moment to just talk about what's going on here, your experience in Beverly Hills, advocating to keep this abortion clinic open. Santa Monica Democratic Club has officially joined in on the coalition for Beverly Hills for Choice. But not everybody here was there for that discussion. And most importantly, you weren't here to explain it. So why don't you start from the beginning and explain to us what's going on?
I get on my feet for this because I always do it better when I'm standing. All right. Hi, just as a quick background on what's been happening. So there's a clinic in Washington, DC, the DuPont Clinic. They offer abortion throughout pregnancy, specializing in high-risk cases, in those situations where it's life or death for the person who's carrying the fetus, or in the case of that fetus is not going to survive and it needs to be done. These are heartbreaking generally situations, but beyond that, it's healthcare. And so whether or not it's a heartbreaking situation doesn't matter. Getting a knee replacement cannot be heartbreaking, but you still get one. Same thing. It doesn't matter, but it was going to be an all-trimester clinic opening in Beverly Hills. They signed their lease in November 2022. So we're going back quite a ways now. November 2022, they signed their lease. They start building out. And going all the way into April 2023, things are moving along. They're getting their permits. Everything is happening as normal. They're having great communication with the Beverly Hills Police Department to discuss potential threats to the building, et cetera. It's going, by the way, into a medical building, an existing medical building on Wilshire Boulevard that already has a clinic in place. It's not abortion throughout pregnancy. It's much more short period, but there's already a clinic in that building. So this is something Beverly Hills is familiar with as a concept. In April, on Holocaust Remembrance Day, 3 people come to a city council meeting. Well, 2 come to a council meeting, 1 calls in. One of them is the organizer of the freedom rallies that we've all seen on Santa Monica Boulevard. I don't want to name names, but yeah, she's there. A buddy of hers is there. And then a woman calls in from Sacramento. Her name is Tasha Barker, and she's the founder of Stop DuPont. And she calls the council meeting to ask them to please, obviously, this is horrible. How can you honor the Holocaust and then allow a Holocaust in your backyard, et cetera, et cetera? Yeah, we love that for an all-Jewish council. And the next day sends emails to all of the council members asking to meet with them. One council member replies. That council member was Council Member Sharona Nazarian, who, while listening to Shiva speak at that council meeting the night prior, sent an email out to the rest of the council and the city manager saying, how did this get through? That was her question upon hearing someone who is known throughout the city to be a MAGA rabble-rouser. Her question was not, why is this woman speaking or anything along those lines? It was, how did this get through? And then what happens is she gets an email. She immediately says, I'd love to meet with you, and culminates in a 9-person meeting. 9 members of Beverly Hills city government meet with, by Zoom, this woman from Sacramento whose sole goal is to stop a business from opening in the city. Even without thinking about whether or not it's an abortion clinic, that's who they decided to meet with. So what we start to see once that happens, it's one thing, it's a small inciting incident. How did this get through? But then we start to see, and we know all this because we filed a PRA. I'll get to that in a second. We start to see that the city attorney pauses the permits and asks the doctor, who has been not just highly commended, was in charge of Planned Parenthood Orange County, was honored by the California State Legislature. He asks her to send a letter promising that she won't violate California state law and that he won't release her permits till he does. I don't think they send that letter to a plastic surgeon. I don't think they send that letter to the estheticians. Somehow it goes out specifically that she needs to provide proof and that he's holding the permits. They hold the permits for over 5 days, refusing to give them to the clinic purely because he wants a promise from her. And so what we start to see happening is on the back end, after one small meeting, the city spends the next basically 8 weeks, it appears, in a frenzy. Never communicating with the clinic, never willingly meeting with the doctor. All they're doing is just working on the back end, holding meetings with the landlord, who is Douglas Emmett, which I'm sure you're all very aware of that landlord. Yeah, we all know them. Yeah, I was saving that one. They start meeting with Doug, so they're having meetings with Douglas Emmett, and the landlord's like, shouldn't we bring in the tenant? And the city's like, no, they're not necessary. We're just concerned about safety issues. And ultimately what happens is that the city tells Douglas Emmett that they have a great plan. They're going to walk door to door, every tenant in the building, a letter from the chief of police that says, there's going to be a clinic opening in your building, and because of the divisive nature of abortion, you should anticipate more violence. And here's how you can protect yourself. A police officer was going to walk it door to door because from what we can see in the emails from the city, they couldn't figure out how to send letters to every person who was registered in a building. I don't know, I feel like they might have been able to just look at the board, but that's not apparently what happened. Understandably, what we see from the records afterward is that shortly after, the landlord rescinds the lease. All of this happens with one really short inciting incident. 3 extremists come out to a council meeting. And that's all it takes for the city to immediately spring into action to stand against it. But that's not the shocking part. The shocking part is what happens after. After that, there's a second group, survivors of the abortion Holocaust. Yeah. And they have heard about this issue and looking to make their own little name for themselves. They have been protesting the clinic, the clinic separately. They come to the city council meeting. 8 people, most of them calling in from San Francisco. No, not local at all. They come to a city council meeting in July after the lease has been rescinded and say, I want to speak with the mayor directly. We want to talk to you about why you shouldn't allow this clinic to open. We then see that on the back end, the mayor requests a personal meeting with the director of survivors of the abortion Holocaust. Someone directs a BHPD deputy to directly negotiate with them and ask them what their demands are, and then help them walk through the permitting process to have a celebration rally, shutting down a lane of Wilshire in front of the medical office on Wilshire Boulevard on a Saturday, during which Councilmember Sharona Nazarian, Mayor Julian Gold, and a couple members of the city government, including the city lawyer, were all publicly thanked from the dais. This all goes completely unnoticed by most of Los Angeles, including myself. What happens is there's one article in the August 14th issue of the LA Times mentioning that there's a lawsuit about to happen with DuPont. Myself and 3 other women start calling around and asking who's doing something about this. What can we do? Turns out everyone's a little busy. So somehow we end up taking this on. And my parents who are watching, when I told them I was going to start doing this in August, I was like, it'll be like 2 or 3 months, and someone who knows better will take over. And I won't have to do it anymore. I just got to get the ball rolling. And now it's almost a year. But we started coming out to council meetings. We started trying to get people to take notice. We started asking our elected officials at every level to say something, to help, to join we have 3 demands, and we asked electeds at every level to join us in our main one, which is we want an independent investigation with public disclosure. Very simple. That's what we need, and that's what we deserve. That's what all residents deserve, not just of Beverly Hills, but of LA County as a whole. We deserve to know when governments are working behind the scenes with extremists, and we deserve to know how our governments work. Well, after several months of that, we finally filed a PRA because the government was giving us a standstill. And I'm so sorry, you can tell me at any time if I'm running long. We filed a PRA, which is a Public Records Act request, in November, where we basically said to the city, we want you to give us every single email, any record, any conversations, phone, text, whatever that mentions abortion, and a whole long list of things. We had the help of the Lawyering Project. They're a pro bono group. They're fantastic. And we filed that, and they eventually got us the records. And what we found, I had always joked around and been like, everyone kind of is acting like this is going to be an All the President's Men situation. I think that we're stuck in the dumbest episode of Parks and Rec. And then we got the records back, and I realized it was somehow the worst fusion of the 2. It was the dumbest episode of All the President's Men, because there was something wrong happening on the back end. And the thing is that, or at least let me rephrase that. It looks very much like something wrong is happening on the back end, and until someone is willing to investigate that and explain what she meant by how did this get through, or what happened when, or what the mayor means when he said that he wanted to turn up the heat a little using the letter, we need those answers, and maybe they were innocent, and we deserve to know also if we're misinterpreting our mayor or we're misinterpreting a council member. These are all important things. So we did our own investigation, and it was really troubling. And I will be happy to share any of those documents because you can see all of them. We've got it all set up where you can download the PDF and see everything. But yeah, what we saw was incredibly troubling. And the demands were to have the permit for the 2 demands for the survivors was 1, to have the permit, and 2, they wanted a promise from the Beverly Hills City Council. The promise was going to be that not only would DuPont not open in Beverly Hills, but it would not open anywhere in Los Angeles, which shows a real understanding of how cities work. And while the city obviously said we cannot, as far as we know, they said that's an impossible ask. What has happened is that they've gotten both of their asks because DuPont put $2 million into renovating that building, or the space rather. They put $2 million into it, and they were about 4 months away from opening when their lease was rescinded. They're now embroiled in a lawsuit that the city of Beverly Hills has filed countersuits on. And until that is resolved and they get their money, there will be no clinic. And so they get everything they want. And so what we're seeing is that they're going through back channels. You know, there's in the LA Times article that was pulled, which was so exciting. They're Emma Craig from, I think that's her name, from Survivors, is interviewed, and she has this fabulous quote where she says, "You snooze, you lose." Thank you. The eye reaction is incredible, to be like so flippant about this thing that they supposedly care so deeply about, that their response is "you snooze, you lose." But what's so insidious about all this is that there was no way we could have known. We did not snooze. We did not miss. It was 2 council meetings with a little bit of open public comment, and everything else happened behind the scenes. And everything else happened without any sort of public disclosure. There was no way we could have known. And so seeing what's happening throughout California, seeing what's happening in Fontana and Visalia, they even say, the survivors even say in that article, this is going to be our blueprint going forward. This is their tactic now. They tested it in Beverly Hills. It worked. They're going to take it elsewhere. So that's, part of why it's been so wonderful to have you guys, is that we need to stand and push back in every city in California against this. Would questions be good?
Let's try to, because we have a lot to cover.
Oh, sorry.
So, first of all, but I just want to say thank you for sharing the story, because, like I was saying earlier, not a lot of people don't realize that this isn't just something happening in red states. It's happening in LA County. And so we're really, this club is totally behind you, and we'll keep being part of the coalition and making sure that we get justice for, all the women in our region, because any one of us could need these services at any time. We don't know. But okay, so
I just want to add that a lot of, what Amanda said, a lot of legislation is passed through behind closed doors. We've seen it across the US, and obviously the Beverly Hills case is just another one of those cases where a lot of these restrictions, bans, or not being able to open up a clinic are happening. And a lot of people don't recognize this on a daily basis, that this is what we are dealing with, and patients ultimately are being, their lives are being, it's detrimental to them and the abortion care that they need and want.
definitely, yeah. Okay, so our club members sent in questions for the panel, and there were 2 topics that came up over and over again that have come up since the Dobbs decision. One is the Supreme Court decision in which they unanimously ruled in favor of preserving access to mifepristone, which is one of the 2 drugs used for medication abortions. And our own Congressman Ted Lieu tweeted out, I used to call him Tweeting Ted. He tweeted out that this was just a short-term victory, and he said, "There's nothing in this opinion that prevents MAGA extremists from passing laws to ban medication abortion, and nothing in the opinion that prevents a future court challenge from a plaintiff withstanding." And so I just wanted to see if you guys could explain what this case was about and why we don't have a clear win with the situation with the standing and everything like that. Ali, did you want to start with that, or go to Sylvia if you rather? Okay, Sylvia, do you want to talk about that ruling?
Sure. The way SCOTUS ruled on this was it was a standing order, meaning that the Supreme Court's decision only means that these particular plaintiffs do not have the right to sue. And so this leaves this open, obviously, for future lawsuits. And one of the ways that this is happening, and perhaps this will be discussed further during the Project 2025, is there is something called the Comstock Act, which was enacted in 1873. It's a federal law that originally aimed to prohibit the distribution of obscene materials. However, they are encompassing shipping abortion pills by mail into this Comstock Act. And what the future holds for mifepristone and is that it could be in a legal controversy again. And, RAP works with a number of providers across the US. Virtually 67% of the individuals that we serve are able to use the abortion pill by mail. It helps with cost where people don't have to travel. It helps with privacy, not having to deal with childcare, gas issues. And so this legal challenge is going to come up again if we are in a situation where Project 2025 takes effect.
Craig, do you want to add anything? You don't have to, we can get, okay, yeah, sure.
I would add on that, so that court case, as well as abbreviated, it's called EMTALA, but around emergency department care as related to pregnant people. We don't see those as win, we just see them as, as Sylvia said, it's kind of like, for now, it's like pause. But ultimately, the fact that these cases even went up to the Supreme Court is alarming and enough reason for concern. And so they may come up again in the future. Just happened to be that with these two cases, there wasn't really strong standing, but yeah.
Okay, thanks. So the other, let me just get through this and then we'll see if there's time for questions. The other topic that kept coming up from our members is regarding the Alabama Supreme Court ruling on frozen embryos. And in February, they ruled that embryos created for the purpose of in vitro fertilization should be seen as children, and therefore many IVF clinics have ceased operations. Now, Republicans responded claiming they definitely, totally, 100% are not against IVF, yet every time they try to take a vote to state on the record that they support IVF, they keep on falling short. So the question is, first of all, let's talk about what happened in this case and what the ruling means. And then also, why are Republicans afraid to vote for an easy legislative fix to, from their perspective, say we're against abortion, we're not against IVF? Why is that such a difficult stance to take? Yeah, sure.
From a totally non-professional perspective, because they're liars. They're hypocrites, they're liars. We've known this for, just real quick, the AOC line about how for 40 years, basically, we've never known a functional government because the Republicans, it's true. What they say doesn't matter. What's in their hearts doesn't matter. Their actions always matter, and we've seen their actions time and again, and that's what we can see on their record. So they're liars.
I would add, I'm gonna be honest, between EMTALA, MIFI, and the IVF case, I mix them all up a little bit, so I don't want to say anything wrong. But I will say this is a common theme with what we will see and we'll discuss around Project 25, which is this like ideology and like language of like personhood, where we're assigning the fetus. We're Republicans are pushing the idea, right, that from conception, this is already a person, and that's very troublesome. And I'm sure we'll dig into that a bit later, but essentially, also this goes back to if Republicans really want to push a narrative and an ideology where we are pushing people to be parents, forcing people to be parents, forcing people to have families, then how are they not, supporting IVF access? I don't know. It doesn't, the ideology, the mindset doesn't line up, so yeah.
Sylvia, did you want to add anything?
I agree with what's been said so far, but I think the big issue also is that there will be huge legal battles over reproductive technology in general. that is going to come up from this Alabama IVF case. And, you know, there's a bit of detail about this in the Project 2025 that I'm certain that people will get into, but that was the only other part that I wanted to add at this point.
Great, so we will have everybody on the panel here stay, I mean, if you're available to stay around for a few minutes, when we do get to Project 2025, and like the second or third question of that, we'll get back to talking about the connection between these two issues, and if anyone wants to weigh in there, we'll welcome you back. But before we do, are there any other big things that we really do need to touch on from your perspective before we close with regard to reproductive rights? Okay, so,
I'm sorry. I just wanted to close the reproductive rights discussion with a patient testimonial. And this testimonial is the reality of somebody who is 13 years old. And I just wanted to, and one of the panelists indicated that there was an increase in the number of rape, incest, and domestic violence survivors. And this is a case that was recently with RAP, and we were able to fully fund. This is an individual that actually had to be hospitalized, and hospitalized cases cost anywhere from $10,000 to $30,000 for us to fund an abortion. And in this particular case, also the mother worked 2 jobs, was very concerned about losing one of her jobs in particular. So I'm just going to read it to you as a closing to this discussion to show the impact this is continuing to have on individuals and families. I am very thankful for helping fund my abortion. I'm only 13 years old and was in a bad situation where I was raped by a grown man and got pregnant in the process. And I don't want to mess my life up by having a baby at a young age. I want to go to school and be something in life. I am very appreciative for everything you have done to help.
well, it's, you know, very difficult, emotional topic, but I really appreciate everybody for your insight here. And thank you for joining us, and let's give a round of applause to Amanda, Aileen, and Sylvia.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And Sylvia, I know you probably couldn't hear it in the room, but it was a very loud, raucous applause that lasted for 20 minutes.
Thank
Okay,
you.
so, you know, I mean, like I said, we'll invite these panelists to add a few thoughts when we get to that intersection there. But first, let's bring out our expert panelists to discuss Project 2025. First of all, we have our longtime friend of the club, David Dayan, who has been our guest many times, going back to at least 2012 that I could determine was at least been around the block, you know, a guest of this club. He's the executive editor of the American Prospect, and joining him on the panel is David's colleague, the editor at large of the American Prospect, Harold Meyerson, who's joining us by Zoom. He's on there. There he goes. Thanks, Harold. And also joining us is Loyola Law School professor Catherine Trisellini. So thank you all for joining us, and let's jump right in. So as Democrats, we're now used to Republicans running on a draconian far-right platform of extremely reprehensible policy positions. That's not new. But what is it about Project 2025 this cycle that's different from what we've seen in past cycles? And David, why don't you start, and then we'll bring in the other expert.
Sure, John, and thanks for having me, and appreciate the club, and it's been a great discussion so far. You're right in saying that what we're seeing with Project 25 is not new. And that's not to minimize it, but to emphasize how long the conservative movement has wanted this level of power. So you can go back and say that there was a project 1921 when Warren Harding came in after the progressive era and wanted to return things to normalcy. And normalcy was a very laissez-faire government. And that was kind of arrested by the Great Depression. You could say there was a project 1973 after Richard Nixon won a landslide election in 72. He fired his entire cabinet and was going to put in a new cabinet that was going to go so far to the right you wouldn't even believe it, according to his Attorney General, John Mitchell. And Watergate kind of ended that. There was definitely a project 1981 because there was an actual paper called Mandate for Leadership, which was written by the Heritage Foundation, which is an oligarch-funded organization. And it's the same name that this current document has. Project 2025 is also called Mandate for Leadership, the Conservative Promise. They have been putting out these documents since 1981, every 4 years, to dictate what could be picked up by a new Republican administration if they won the election. And, you know, there were for various reasons in the 80s, a Democratic Congress and other reasons that they haven't gotten everything through that they wanted. But it's a lot of the same kind of stuff, and I'm sure we'll get into the details. What's different about this is that actually this version of the Heritage Foundation document is kind of two things that are new. One is a very detailed blueprint on how to put loyalists into office in place of government bureaucrats and civil service officials. That is definitely very, very new. And there are actual policies that the Trump administration put in at the end of his term in 2020 that would be brought back. There's something called Schedule F, which would get thousands of government employees essentially taken out of their jobs despite civil service protections and replaced by loyalists. And then the second thing, which I think is almost more important, is that in association with this document that details not only what to do, but how to get these people in place to do it, it's almost kind of a job board. They have, you know, sought out tens of thousands of individuals who they say, if you want to get involved in this movement, in taking back government, in making America great again, you know, sign up here and call us, and we'll get you placed in the government as long as you do everything we say. And so there is, you know, you're hearing in the last 24 hours that Project 2025 has been shut down. It has not been shut down in any way, shape, or form. It did its policy work. The Republican convention is over. We have the documents. There it is. This phone tree, I think it's a little bigger than that. It's about 900 pages. This sort of phone tree, this list of conservative officials is what a new administration will draw from, especially if they enact, you know, Schedule F and these other kind of protections or anti-protections, really, to allow these other kinds of officials and loyalists into the government. So those, I think, are the real distinguishing features of this. So obviously, the details on policy really, really matter and are really, really important. At the Prospect, we actually had a cover story on this in December 2023, where my colleague Harold read every damn page of this thing almost a year ago. So we've certainly been looking at the details of the policy, but it's really, you can really see this as more of a document on how to take over government and a way to find the people who would actually do that. So that's all I got. There you go.
Thank you. Yes, this is both different and the same in certain ways. What I see about it, the part of it that I'm really focused on, that I've really looked at, are the environmental impacts. If this were, what are they trying to do environmentally? That's my area of research. I look at climate change policy, climate change law, climate change regulation. This is a comprehensive plan to get rid of everything that we have been trying to do to address the climate, and including repealing statutes that were adopted in Republican administrations. So this is in that way more extreme. And the way the document is designed, it goes agency by agency. If there's time, I have some slides. I can tell you some of the key plans that they have for certain agencies and some of the proposals that they've made and which rules. But they fundamentally reject the broad scientific, the overwhelming scientific consensus of what's happening and what Americans can see. And what at the local level and what even, the rank and file Republicans know is happening, which is we're having terrible wildfires. We're having terrible storms. Diseases are spreading into different vectors. The vectors are moving into areas they haven't been because of climate. There are conflicts over water resources. I mean, that's just a few things that are happening, and they're happening now. To personalize it, as Congressman said recently, my cousin's house burned down in an area where it shouldn't have burned down. I was mandatory evacuated from my home in a massive wildfire. These are happening now, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. So they want to pretend that none of this is happening. And this is a blueprint for how to undo all the climate regulation that we've done. And a lot of it is just preventing science from being conducted, obliterating federal agencies' plans to address climate. And I can also talk about how this quote that's been somehow disavowed is completely ridiculous, certainly on the climate issues. One of the overwhelming goals of this in terms of climate is to shift to a heavily expanded use of fossil fuels. They want to drill more in public waters. They want to drill more on public lands. They want to block limitations on polluters and on fossil fuel producers and users. And the people who wrote these sections were members of Trump's cabinet. They were Trump appointees. They founded organizations to support Trump. So this is not something that is separate from Trump somehow. And if you look at the RNC's platform, they literally use the words, we want to reestablish American energy dominance, drill, baby, drill. They put those words in capital letters in their platform. And I'm assuming that in this crowd, I don't need to tell you, that climate change is really serious. And one of the big problems is our continued use of fossil fuels, which keep putting these heating gases into the atmosphere. So they really want to not only go backwards, but go worse than backwards. And we just can't let that happen.
Okay, Harold?
Harold, if you might have to unmute yourself first, but.
There we go. I think the first time I talked at the Santa Monica Democratic Club was in the 1980s. So just noting that. Yes, so David had me read every frigging one of the 925 pages last fall. And a couple of things. In a sense, the current version, Project 2025, just restates some of the classic far-right positions that you would expect. What in some ways makes it different, in addition to how David, documented it was really replace the existing bureaucracy and officialdom with our zealots, it spends a lot of time on identifying who they want to replace. It is an enemies list, among other things. talking about the Pentagon, it says, well, we basically want to just get rid of generals and admirals because they've been into this DEI stuff. It does have a clear animus against scientists per se. And in general, one of the suggestions is that scientists can serve, but they should not be on any rulemaking committees. Of course, that leaves the rulemaking committees open to people who are not simply not scientists, but in many ways anti-scientists. It's not like they necessarily want to completely abolish these agencies while raking the Center for Disease Control, CDC, over the coals for, presumably its involvement with the mask mandate and things like that. I mean, it's a very Trumpified document, as some of the previous Quadrennial Heritage Foundation reports are not specifically attuned to the presumptive nominee. This one is. So for the CDC, they said, well, you should do something, and I'm going to quote, it should fund studies into the risks and complications of abortion. So, it can redefine what a good scientist would be doing. That would be that. It shouldn't be doing anything strengthening regulations at OSHA or anything like that. Some of what it suggests goes along with what the far right has believed for years and is not specifically Trumpian on labor law, which is an interesting section, because here it does what Trump did at his convention, which every now and then, it tries to have a worker-friendly face. And one of the Republicans who is actually involved in this sort of thing, a guy named Orrin Cass, was able to get one suggestion in there that I think the people on Biden's NLRB would agree with. But then it's completely undercut by saying, well, we would also, what we really would like is for states to get 5-year waivers from the National Labor Relations Act to see how things can get along without legalized collective bargaining. And then after 5 years, they can assess whether workers are doing better or what. Of course, who gets to assess with what criteria is left unspecified. And again, there's a nice little Christian nationalist component to this as well. They hasten to add that they do think workers should get time and a half if they're compelled to work on the Sabbath. Whose Sabbath, they don't say. If your day off is in the middle of the week, it's pretty clear you need to form your own religion with the Sabbath that's on Wednesday if you want to qualify for this, or you're just denominationally out of luck. In some ways, again, for me, the kind of culmination of traditional far-right conservatism was in their section on healthcare generally, Medicare, Medicaid, where they have been, when they tried to repeal Obamacare, they were utterly incapable, though having a Republican president in control of both houses of Congress, of coming up with an alternative. So they're kind of challenged students when it comes to this. But they did have a suggestion for Medicaid, just leaped out at me. And then this is, I want to read you half of the quote. They're talking about that Medicaid recipients probably need to increase their copays. And they need to increase it to, and I quote, a level that is appropriate to, and I'm going to stop the quote there because I think most of us would think that sentence would go, they need to increase it to a level that is appropriate to the Medicaid recipient's income. But no, it reads, increase it to a level that is appropriate to protect the taxpayer, which means essentially, giving them radically higher copays. What's really different, though, is that this has a very explicit sense of Trumpian grievance against the presumed liberal establishment that has always underlaid conservatism going back to, Joe McCarthy and God knows who else, but it's more explicit here. It identifies more enemies, and it to build on what David said about being able to replace civil servants, it takes special aim at what Trump once said, you know, well, I might be a dictator for day one. It has a kind of a day one agenda. Noting that, you know, getting one's cabinet appointees through confirmed is not often a day one process. There's going to be pushback if you try to make Michael Flynn Secretary of Defense, even among some Republicans, et cetera. But it points out that deputy directors of agencies and undersecretaries of cabinet appointments can be appointed, you know, can just be appointed by the president and instantly run the agency until the person ultimately on top is confirmed. So it pays attention to that. And in this section, which is written by Ken Cuccinelli, who at one point I think was the very right-wing state official. I'm losing it now, whether he was in Virginia or Kansas. Anyway, a notable right-winger, I think in Virginia. He also adds that the president could declare a leading position like this vacant if it's occupied by a civil servant, and go down the food chain until you find a political appointee. You just strike these vacancies, and that political appointee can run the department or the agency, you know, at the president's behest. So, you know, and there's also talk about when an agency is rulemaking, the presidency should have the power to exempt the requirement that the rule goes through the administrative, what is it, the Administrative Protection Act? Which you know requires a period of public response to a proposed rule. In theory, you would think a conservative document which is not all that friendly to regulations and rules wouldn't want this. But you know, this is basically to say when we control said agency, we want to do this stuff right away, and so get rid of the 90 days of public comments or whatever usually accompanies that sort of thing. So it enables a power grab. It names enemies from generals and admirals to scientists and many others. And it's a combination of the traditional far right, anti-worker, anti-most people positions with a particular sense of Trumpian grievance added on to all of this. And a lot of this having been written in 2023, a lot of this focuses on what is presumably woke. The word woke is less in vogue now than it was in 2023, but it saw the specter of woke as something to be extirpated by any means possible. So that's that.
Great. Well, thank you so much for laying it out, and for the rest of the questions, I mean, whoever feels like they want to chime in, we don't need to have 3 answers for everything. We can, depending on the question, but let's get into some of this now. First of all, I wanted to ask about the mechanics of how all this works. I mean, both parties try all the time to pass legislation and it doesn't get the right votes, and that's the end of it. How is it that the executive branch would be able to enact all of this without Congress, without legislation, without even review from the judiciary?
So I think what we need to recognize is that the executive branch not only has a lot of power, but has been aggrandizing a lot of power over the last 40 years or more. You're probably familiar with the term unitary executive, which was developed actually probably even earlier than this, but came to its pinnacle in the Bush administration in the 2000s, which was an attempt to grab more power for the executive. Now, I and the Prospect wrote in 2019 when there was kind of a little bit of despair over the fact that, yeah, maybe we'll beat Trump and get a Democratic president, but we might not have Congress, and much like you just said, what are we going to do? You know, we're not going to have an avenue to get much done, I wrote a thing called the Day One Agenda. And it talked about how, you know, we've passed a lot of statutes over the years, and those statutes are somewhat malleable. And those statutes could be put to use to get real things done. And the Biden administration, to their credit, picked up some of this stuff. They have put us on the path to rescheduling marijuana away from a Schedule I drug, for example. They attempted to cancel a good deal of student debt. They engaged in a process whereby they could seize patents from drug companies that were not distributing those drugs on quote unquote reasonable terms, in other words, unaffordably. So there have been things that the Biden administration has attempted in this arena, and they've done a lot of rulemaking on rules that just hadn't been updated or hadn't been completed from previous years, given the authority already by Congress. What we have seen is that the judiciary has fought back very vociferously against that, particularly in the Fifth Circuit out in Texas, but also at the Supreme Court level, blocking student debt relief, blocking a number of rules that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and the Federal Trade Commission and others have put into play. But the point is that the executive did have the power to attempt all that stuff. And when they're attempting it on the side of maybe things that the judiciary would be inclined to do, a conservative Supreme Court would be inclined to wade through, then that gives even more power to a potential executive. And especially the fact that Trump, who was a bit stymied in his first term by the establishment Republicans that were put into place, that he had at his side because he didn't really have a team behind him. The fact that he would be able to put in loyalists into so many of these positions, and that those loyalists would not only by rulemaking, but their interpretation of rules, their prosecutorial discretion, their enforcement discretion, all of those things would be able to enact the very agenda that Trump would be able to do. And it doesn't seem to me that the judiciary, at least at the Supreme Court level, would have much to do about that. Now, in the first term, certainly judges or attorneys general here in California and elsewhere did attempt to stop some of the most egregious Trump rules. But I will end with this point that you all remember the concept of building the wall, correct? So Congress, at least after the first 2 years, did not appropriate money that would enable Trump to have continued to build the wall. So what he did was he sort of declared it a homeland security or national security emergency. And he took money from the military budgets, particularly the military construction budget, and moved it to build the wall. And a bunch of Democrats took him to court over that because it was obviously usurping the power of the purse, the power of the legislature to say, this is what's going to be appropriated. And the Supreme Court said he was allowed to do that. So this is a very different posture than the Supreme Court has had against the Biden administration, where anything that they don't particularly like, they have blocked. They allowed a president to essentially repurpose funds from one place to another for an ideological purpose. And I think you would see a lot more of that again in a second Trump term, and some of the things in Project 2025 talk about that.
I think what I'd add to that, thank you, what I'd add is certainly the power of the executive is on display in spades in the environmental arena. I teach environmental law, and I'm trying to explain to my students how EPA could change so drastically in a matter of years, right? And they're like, and I remember giving a talk to some undergrads at UCLA, and I said, EPA said this, and then a few years later they said that, and they said, but how could they do that? And I said, well, what changed in that time? You know, what might have changed? Oh, we got a new president, right? They appoint a new head of the agency, and the head of the agency has a lot to do with the agenda of the agency and the rulemaking. So we went from the Obama administration, in which finally, EPA, which had been told to do this by the Supreme Court earlier, but kind of stalled until Obama came into office, began regulating greenhouse gases. They finally said, yes, Supreme Court had said, under the Clean Air Act, greenhouse gases are a pollutant that you're supposed to regulate. And so EPA began that process of developing those regulations and putting them into place. Then Trump administration comes in and they start backpedaling and undoing regulation after regulation. They got sued because those were irrational, because we have the Administrative Procedures Act, which means agencies can't just do anything they want. They have to follow the law in how they do it. They have to do what the statute tells them to do. They have to give reasons and explain it. And eventually, but it took a long time, the majority of those unscientific, politically motivated stances that EPA took were undone. Not all of them, but most of them were undone, but it took a long time. Then we get the Biden administration, and we have new heads of the agencies. So it's EPA, it's Department of Interior, the Bureau of Land Management. All of those folks are setting an agenda for these agencies about protection from pollution, how our public lands and waters are used, whether we give out leases for massive drilling where we get very little money from it and the oil companies get rich on it. Whether we open lands in Alaska in native areas to being drilled in. So all of those things, the heads of the agencies have a lot to do with the agenda. And if I have a moment, I'll say one other thing that even a lot of lawyers don't know about. There's this part of the government in both Republican and Democratic administrations have promoted review of agency rules by this little tiny department called the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs. How many of you have heard of it?
We've written about
Most
it.
of you have heard of it. A lot of you've written stories on it. A lot of people haven't even heard of it. But by executive order, it got established to review every big regulation that comes out. And they set these rules saying, we're going to check and make sure that the amount that it costs industry to put in this regulation, that you justify it by showing, by monetizing the benefits. So if you're telling us 100 kids aren't going to get asthma, how much is that worth in money? If you're telling us 10,000 people aren't going to die of heart attacks, give us a number, right? And we want to show that it works numerically. I mean, I'm oversimplifying and I can tell you more about it, but the way this agency is run is really important. If they say, oh, we don't count that as a benefit because you can't put a number on it. A lot of things that are benefits to our health, to the environment, it's hard to give a number. So it really matters how this agency is run, and it's controlled by the executive branch, and it's hidden. Most people don't know about it unless they read your article.
Just real quick on that, the Biden administration actually did pay attention to OIRA and did something, if you want to get really weedy, it's called Circular A4, which changed the cost benefit analysis radically to allow agencies to conduct more rules and not have that kind of funneling effect that OIRA did. I would suspect that would be one of the first things that a Trump administration would come in and get rid of, this Circular A4.
Yeah,
I would just say that one regulatory board that always reverses 180 degrees if the presidency switches from one party to the other is the National Labor Relations Board, which the Republicans have somehow been able to use to thwart all organizing campaigns. Democrats have tried usually to use it to support it. Only under Biden, though, has a Democratic NLRB, particularly its general counsel, who's a woman named Jennifer Abruzzo, really come up with creative ways to really foster more organizing, even given the failure of Congress to pass reforms to the National Labor Relations Act. But that classically switches from a pro-union to an anti-union position with every switch of party control of the White House.
Okay, so
I want to get through some of the big topics and we'll come back to see if we have time for questions. But let's look at some of these specific policy areas. And Kathy, we're definitely going to come back to the environmental topic. I know you have a whole presentation to share. But as promised earlier, let's talk a little bit about the reproductive rights that this gets into. And to the panelists that were up here before, if you want to weigh in, just come up and do so. But we know that the Republicans have such a big priority to assert their control over women's bodies for some reason. So how does the Project 2025 agenda go above and beyond the already horrific goal of banning abortion nationwide? I mean, that is already scary enough. What else is in this document that gets into the reproductive area?
Well, it's not quite as explicit as some Republican policy, but it is against the use of mifepristone, and it does at every instance, for instance, saying the CDC should be funding studies into the risks and complications of abortion. Every time it can sneak that into other sections, I mean, the Defense Department should not be spending money on having women go across state lines to get women who are in the military go across state lines to get abortions, that sort of thing. Every time that comes up in different parts of this very long document, they kind of reach for a way to make it clear that they want to stop abortions if there's any connection to any agency of government.
And one thing to add to this, so one of the sections that I printed out for myself, oh, can you hear me?
It's easier.
On
Zoom.
On Zoom.
One of the sections that I had printed was the general welfare section. And so I have a little insight. There's a quote in here about HHS. They say HHS pushes abortion as a form of healthcare, skirting and sometimes blatantly defying the Hyde Amendment. And then I believe this is the person who wrote the section on the FDA. They say this person writes that the FDA should reverse its approval of chemical abortion drugs, and because it was illegal from the start. And they say HHS programs often violate the spirit and sometimes the letter of conscience protection laws. And they said the secretary should pursue a robust agenda to protect the fundamental right to life, protect conscience rights, and uphold bodily integrity rooted in biological realities, not ideology. They should reverse the Biden administration's focus on LGBTQ plus equity, and other things. And they should replace Biden policies to encourage marriage, work, motherhood, fatherhood, and the nuclear family.
Yeah, and I'll just echo, I don't know if Sylvia's still here, but, she was talking about the Comstock Act, which is this 19th century law that, bans pornographic material. Basically, the Comstock was kind of a nut who, didn't want to see that material because he thought he'd be addicted to it. That's really the origin of the Comstock Act. And so he got it banned. And so this could be put to use to ban the movement of these particular abortion drugs through the US mail. I think that's probably the more dangerous thing, because the Comstock Act is sitting, although kind of dormant law, that could be put through without any additional action from Congress. That's what's, I think, important here, is that much of this stuff doesn't need additional congressional approval.
Now, the Comstock Act has been sort of a de facto, though not de jure, dead letter. It's been sort of ignored. It's been, as David said, it's been lying there since the late 1920s. In the 1920s, it was used as the pretext to close down 2 Broadway shows of Mae West. For those of you who Nome West. And that was about the last time it was invoked. But this, like the Arizona abortion ban of 1864, when there were only 9,000 American citizens living in Arizona. You know, a lot of this is almost paleontological excavations of previous, you know, long forgotten mores, which, you know, the Republican right is happy to, you know, inflict on women and the population in general.
Great, thanks. So Kathy, I'm going to turn the floor over to you, and you've got a presentation to share a little bit from with regard to the environmental implications of the project 2025, and then I think there's some other topics you're going to touch on too. So go ahead and.
I'll try to be, I saw that there were questions and comments, so I'll try to be quick so that we'll have more time. Yeah. So you can just, is there a way for me to, you could advance it a couple of slides? I was just going to give you some examples. That's all it is. Some examples from what I saw in here about what they want to do to the agencies. And it's not at all comprehensive. These are a sample of some of the policies that I saw that I think might resonate. And if you have questions about, well, what these mean, I'm happy to talk about them. Okay. So they want to, quote, unleash American energy resources on public and private lands. They want to reestablish energy dominance. And as the other speaker was talking about, there is this kind of quality of complaining and griping. Oh my gosh, it's so hard. There's this terrible war on fossil fuels. But they do this by eliminating pollution protection. They attack renewables, just even referring to windmills as eyesores. People shouldn't have to put up with it, which I think was just bizarre. And eliminating research, pretending climate change doesn't exist. So next slide. Don't be fooled by the disavowal. I think we've been talking about that. J.D. Vance wrote the foreword to this book by the president of the Heritage, who was basically talking about a lot of this plan. So they're buddies, they're close buddies, and he was praising Kevin Roberts' plans to circle the wagons and load the muskets in order to reform the federal government. The thing is, when I first looked at this plan a number of months ago, I was like, who are all these people? Trump appointee, buddy of Trump, buddy of Trump, buddy of Trump. I mean, it's way more than the ones I'm describing. It's all Trump folks. So for him to say he doesn't know about this thing is absolutely laughable. And of course, I think it is some of the extreme things he's, as much as I dislike him, a savvy politician, and he knows that some things aren't going to sell and he doesn't want to make them public. And I told you about the drill, baby drill. The capital letters are in the original, not mine. Next slide, please. So for the Department of Energy, here are some of just a sample of some of the things that they're talking about doing. The person, the author of this, Trump appointee to head a major federal agency, FERC. They want to repeal the acts that were that we've had in the last few years that brought about this great investment that we have in updating our infrastructure and bringing it into the 21st century, developing green energy. Just get rid of them, right? They don't want that investment. They want to eliminate the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. As I said, it was established in 1975. And they said, if we can't eliminate it, because that would take an act of Congress, we're going to try to get it defunded, just gut it somehow. Eliminate this Advanced Research Project Agency established by statute in 2007. The Office of Clean Energy Demonstration and the Office of Fossil Fuel and Carbon Management were also established by Congress by statute. Federal legislation want to get rid of those. They want to end electricity grid planning that would incorporate renewables. So we have this very complicated energy delivery structure through a grid, and you have to balance, the operators have to balance all the sources. So they're figuring out how to add these new sources. They say, we don't want you looking into that anymore. Don't figure out how to do renewables. And subsidies for renewables. there is a huge irony here, which I wish I had another slide on. We have been giving massive subsidies to fossil fuels for 100 years. We have been giving them massive tax subsidies, and that's why those energy sources are dominating. They are the welfare cheats. They are the real welfare cheats. They have been getting incredibly rich, polluting this country while getting tax credits to do it and funding and subsidizing it. And that's to the extent, and renewables, despite all this, are becoming very competitive. But to the extent that there's an imbalance, it's because we have funded fossil fuels so extensively. They want to end advanced energy research and limit the consideration of environmental impacts when approving natural gas pipelines. As I said, it's just a sample. Next slide. Let's see, this is a great quote. The author of this section says, the cause of the energy crisis, it's made up. This quote, and they use quotation marks, combating climate change. That's just not real. And he goes after everybody. He says, okay, the Biden administration, Congress, some states, Wall Street investors, international corporations, progressive special interest groups. So everybody, or blame everybody is what they're saying for this trying to change the energy landscape. Yes, a lot of people are doing that because we need to do it to have a safe planet. The congressman talked about taking away something. I love our planet. We can breathe the air, and it stayed in a relatively stable temperature range for the last 10,000 years while we were developing our way of life. Before that, it was going like this, and we didn't have people living on the coast and doing agriculture. I don't want the temperature to start going crazy again like that. That would be a great loss, and I am averse to that loss of our stable environment. But they said this is all an artificial problem, they put it in quotes, that was created by special interests. Next slide, please. So the author of the section on the Department of Interior was the deputy director during Trump administration, and Trump nominated him to be the director in 2020. He had kind of a troubled tenure, so I don't have all the details in there. Again, focuses on expanding fossil fuel production, describes Biden's war on fossil fuels, again, calls for restoring energy dominance. So that phrase is all over the document, like written in a bunch of different sections and talking about this supposed war on fossil fuels. And it criticizes Biden for saying that the way we manage our public resources should take into account climate change, and that we should try to protect the world from that. It calls on the next president to maximize fossil fuel production and exploration on federal lands and federal waters, including opening protected resources to drilling and mining. There are a lot of Republicans who really love our natural resources, and I don't think, but this is more extreme, I think, than the rank and file Republicans would be interested in. But it's even extreme regardless of where the party has gone. Next slide, please. And then the last thing I'm going to mention is the section on the EPA. She was in Trump's EPA and founded this organization that is dedicated to informing the public about all the economic and environmental gains under the Trump administration. Again, talks about Biden as having an assault on the energy sector. Some of the proposals, and these are just samples, reduce greenhouse gas reporting, drastically limiting scientific research. I think this is really disturbing. Getting rid of programs that gave grants for environmental science activities. And I talked a little bit before about this cost benefit analysis. They say, we don't want you to consider the cost of climate change in a rulemaking. So if you have to do that cost benefit analysis, don't consider climate change. They say the way they talk about costs and benefits is kind of upside down, because they're See, they're talking about an avoided harm. You have to call that a benefit, right? That has to outweigh what industry has to spend. But basically, they're saying, when you're deciding on the regulation, don't look at those costs. Repeal Biden administration's on hydrofluorocarbons. These were passed under bipartisan legislation where we were implementing an international protocol to put limits on these. And they say, we don't like the way you're doing that. So very extreme. They say EPA's structure and mission should be greatly circumscribed. That is a quote. These last couple here are quotes. High priority should be repeal or reform of the Global Change Research Act of 1990. That's doing research into global climate change. That was passed and signed in the H.W. Bush administration. George H.W. signed that, and they're like, nope, we don't want that information. And they're preventing other states from adopting California greenhouse gas standards for cars and trucks. And one last, it's not quite on climate change, but oddball thing I didn't see coming. They really want to, it is an environmental issue, expand research on advanced nuclear weapons and get us out of any non-proliferation agreements. Very extreme.
Well. That was disturbing on a number of levels. So let me go to you, Harold and David. Is there anything else in the 900-page document that Kathy left out that we should make sure to highlight right now?
About 850
Right,
pages. I'd rather actually try to
Okay,
take
I think Harold, okay. Okay, well, Harold, were you gonna say something, or I don't know if you were on mute?
He is on.
You're muted right now. If you need, you're gonna need to unmute yourself.
I just wanted to say that every page is really a gem, so we are leaving out many things. Although, like the Republican convention itself, there was a lot of repetition in those 900 pages. I would point out that the very last point on Kathy's last slide about forbidding states to go by California's emissions standards runs straight against a traditional conservative belief in states' rights, but consistency is not what really we need to expect from them, or as David pointed out, in terms of what the courts say is okay and what the courts say is not okay. Double standards are just thriving and running amok in conservative belief and practice right now.
Thank you, and Kathy, as you mentioned, I know Donald Trump has been saying he doesn't know about this, so hopefully he has the chance to watch the recording of this YouTube video, learn a little bit about it, and if you're watching, Mr. Trump, I just want to say you're an embarrassment to the country. You should resign from the race. Anyway, so we can open it up to questions, but I want to ask one more question of the panel. So is there any solution for Democrats to stop this agenda if they did control one or both branches of Congress, but still hopefully it doesn't happen, Trump becomes president? Or has the Heritage Foundation discovered like a crazy unavoidable loophole that provides a pathway toward ending American democracy?
Sure. So, I mean, I think all governments, whether they represent, divided government or unified government, reflect contests of power between the various branches. What we've seen in the last few years is the judicial branch assert an enormous amount of power to really shape regulations, the power to nullify acts of the executive branch and the legislative branch. I think what the Heritage Foundation is after in this document is to reassert that power on behalf of the executive. One really salient example is the issue of something called impoundment, which has been nullified by both the judicial and the legislative branches both in legislation called the Impoundment Act and by the courts that litigated it. And what impoundment means is that the executive president would be able to dictate where federal appropriations actually go to and be able to nullify certain federal appropriations, cut in funding for things that he or she, hopefully she, doesn't like. And despite the fact that this has been roundly condemned and made illegal by both Congress and the courts, the Trump administration or Trump campaign and this document and the people behind it are still talking about using impoundment. They asked the person who currently is the House Appropriations Committee chair, a guy named Tom Cole, who's a pretty moderate Democrat, all things considered, Republican from Oklahoma, about impoundment. And he kind of said, well, if that's what Trump wants to do, that's what Trump's going to do. And I would expect the courts to go in that direction as well. And so in that, you see, even if it's a fully Democratic Congress and you have Trump as president, and the Democratic Congress says, these are the priorities we want, and we're going to pass this new budget that puts money into infrastructure investment, that puts money into protecting the climate, things like that. Trump could say, well, you know, this money that goes to a state that's a so-called sanctuary state, I want to cut that money. This money that goes towards, woke various activities, I don't want that being funded, et cetera, et cetera. And what, the parts of the legislature and the courts are saying, at least on the Republican side, is that we can do that. He can do that. So I think there are ways for the legislative branch to fight back. I think there are ways for the judicial branch to fight back. But the easiest way, of course, to fight back is to not have Donald Trump become president again. And I think that's the answer.
Let me add that if Trump is elected and Republicans control the Senate, and if they do control the Senate, it's going to be like with 51 or 52 votes, then again, the filibuster and the 60 vote cloture hurdle is in play. And, Trump, I suspect, will urge the Republicans, as some have urged the Democrats when they have a small majority, to axe the cloture supermajority requirement for some of his laws, including senatorial appointments. I think that would be a live issue, the status of the 60 vote supermajority, if Trump is president and the Republicans control the Senate.
All right, so first, regard to questions, if you're on Zoom, you can raise your virtual hand. If you're in person, we do need you to come up to the front so that you can have the microphone. So if you have a question, just come up here and we'll call and just come up. We have enough time for maybe three. Oh, okay. So there's enough time for about 3 questions. So let's start here. You come up, you can use the lectern to.
Hello, everyone. Is it okay if I ask 2 separate questions? One for the 2025 panel and one for Amanda from Beverly. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
So for the 2025 panel, I was curious, with the overturning of Chevron, which is surprising when you guys mentioned that, that's also very important, compounds with the risks of Project 25. If Trump doesn't become president, that's still overturning, that overturn didn't happen. Now the judiciary is effectively more powerful than the legislature in government agencies. How does that get made?
Sure. So Chevron, that specific term refers to a function for the last 40 years known as Chevron deference. And what that means is that federal agencies that write rules were given the ability to interpret vague statutes in a reasonable fashion, and that the courts would defer to the agency's interpretation of that. With a court ruling this year in Loper Bright, is the name of the case. The courts have said, no, we will not be deferent to agency interpretations. And it gives a green light for courts to jump in and make ideological, really, determinations on various agency rules. I think this is more in play in a Democratic administration than in a Republican one right now, for that reason. I've got a pretty big piece coming on this in a couple of months. I've been talking to a lot of congressional experts about what Congress looks like after Chevron, because Congress is going to have to write more specific legislation. They're going to have to write legislation with an eye to the courts. They might even have to write what they're able to do, which is jurisdiction stripping rules, saying that actually the court can't look at this particular law, or that only a particular court can look at this law, like the DC Circuit. You can't have another court look at it. And there are all sorts of ways that Congress can take back that power. However, under a Trump administration, I think the Chevron will work almost in the opposite direction. If we had a court that was blind rather than one that clearly is putting its thumb on the scale, because I think what Trump administration officials are going to do is interpret those agency rules in radically different ways in which they were written, and interpret them in ways that are deregulatory, essentially. I mean, what we have to remember is that Chevron itself was an attempt to look at a statute in a very deregulatory way. It was ruled in 1984. It was the Reagan administration's EPA under the direction of Ann Gorsuch, who was Neil Gorsuch's mom, who ran EPA at that time, trying to interpret a law, an environmental law, in a way that was favorable to particular, oil company interests. And the National Resources Defense Council sued over that, and then we came up with Chevron deference. Chevron was involved in the case as well. So over the years, this has flipped from, agency interpretations from a deregulatory side needing that deference to now, if you want to write any rule at all, particularly in vague statutes that where when the statute was written, we didn't have all the information that we would know of new things, AI, things like that happening in the world that couldn't be anticipated by a particular law. The agencies are supposed to get a little leeway there. They won't have that now, and they need to rethink how they operate. And, there are a variety of reasons why that would be bad in a Harris administration, and why the Congress needs to reassert itself in that fashion. But in a Trump administration, in a perfect world, this would also be a problem for them. Unfortunately, I think the Supreme Court will have no problem saying, go ahead.
I would add to that, and that's a great review of the Chevron doctrine. Those of you who may not be in the weeds reading these regulations all the time, if you think about it, Congress they're generalists, right? And they want to have us, they say, let's have clean air that's good enough for human health. Well, they're not going to get in the weeds and say 450 parts per million. These are very long documents to figure out what's healthy. We have new pollutants coming out, right? The agencies need the flexibility to address new situations without going back to Congress. The Clean Air Act was last amended in 1990. Congress is not going to specify this stuff. And if they start to amend it, they're going to trash it, right? A lot of these statutes they're not getting updated because Congress is broken, right? And so we need to use the law that we have on the books, and it's making it harder. The Supreme Court also, in a case called West Virginia versus EPA, made up a new doctrine. They totally made it up. And they said, well, yes, usually, agencies can work under, the room that the statute gives them to make decisions. But if it's a major question, and they made that up, like climate change, then they've got to have more direction from climate, right? So thank you from Congress. Thank you for correcting me. From Congress, the Congress has to spell it out. So in addition to messing with what agencies could do, that's a huge power grab on the part of the Supreme Court, because who decides what a major question is? That court, right? They're like, if we say it's no, that looks like a major, no, that's not. Trump did it, not a major question. Harris did it, that looks like a major question to us, right? Huge power grab.
You have a part two?
Yeah, I do.
Or to. Yeah, it's to Amanda, so I'm actually.
Well, you'll need.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for allowing me to ask two questions. So Amanda, I actually, just like you, I didn't find out about the case until I read the LA Times article too, and I'm reading the local news like crazy. What I am curious about is, do we know why the city council people were so compelled by crazies to do something like that? Because it's like, I've served on two different city boards, and no one comes to city council meetings. No one cares about what the fire appeals board or the community development board does. We have crazies, we have like people who work in the business, like engineers who come in and deal and talk. But most of the time, the public doesn't care about these things. You know, it's pulling teeth to get the public to care. And usually when, you know, city councilmen and board members and whatnot deal with people like that, they brush them off and let them say their public comments and they go on and do about their business. What compelled the city of Beverly Hills councilmen to want to act so quickly against the constituents, which, you know, Beverly Hills is a heavy blue city.
Yes.
And if you know the reason, would it make sense for the Beverly Hills residents to order a recall against those city council members because they're acting against the interests of their constituents?
So so first to the point of Beverly, it is a lot of people when they hear about it say, well, you know, it's Beverly Hills, they're very conservative. And I'm like, no, it's not. It's a very socially liberal area. And I think it was a 60% approval rate, like vote for Prop 1. It passed with, I think, 60 or 63%. This is not a conservative in the way that we think of conservative demographic. So this was doing a disservice to their constituents above all else. The why we've been asked that a lot. Do you think, you know, Beverly Hills had when Roe fell, when the Dobbs ruling came out, first the city hall was lit up pink. The then mayor, because it's a rotating mayorship, the then mayor Lily Bossie, did a whole proclamation. They sent it to the Supreme Court to show how Beverly Hills felt very strongly about abortion access and how important it is. And that was actually a big part of what DuPont says was a big part of why they picked Beverly Hills, was because Beverly Hills took such an aggressive stance in 2022. What I have come to feel as I have looked through and been sitting with all the public documents we've gotten and seeing what's happening behind the scenes, to me, the why no longer matters. In the sense that I don't care if someone did it because they're anti-choice or if they did it because they were afraid of the ugliness. Because the protesters, when they came before council, were, again, you know, one of them was the ringleader of the anti-Trump protest. Like, the city is dealing with a large number of protests that they don't necessarily want to have on their hands, and a lot of people coming in that they don't want in the city. Being very aggressive. And so I can see from that standpoint why their feeling was, we're going to cut this off at the pass. Let's not deal with the ugliness. Let's not deal with it. I had a council member when we did meet with a couple of council members who weren't named in the lawsuit, and one of them kind of dismissively, we have other clinics in the city. We just kind of waved it off. Like, why do we need another? I don't care what the reason is. The point is the action. And I think that we've all focused too much for too long on just ideologically, is it a why? Who cares what the why is? Who cares if Donald Trump's a racist or not? His words are racist. The actions are racist. That's what matters. And so same thing here. I think that there might have been good intentions on some levels. I think personally, some of the people were anti-choice. I am very concerned about the fact that the council member who instigated the whole thing and who was thanked and said, wow, with 3 exclamation points after she was thanked by the extremists, she did get the LA County Democratic Party endorsement during her run in 2022. That's concerning. That why matters to me, but the why of why this all happened, I care less and less about what people's true beliefs are and more the fact that your true belief, we've seen it with Joe Biden. Your personal belief in abortion does not matter if you are willing to obey the rule of law. Joe Biden doesn't believe that abortion is, ethical. It doesn't stop him from still managing to do his job and his sworn duty to the people. Same thing here.
Thanks, Janice. And Stacy, you'll be next.
So one of the roles that I've played over the years in this club is one of the valuable things we do is to try to give recommendations on the judicial endorsements. And it's a really tricky thing to do because the judges are supposed to not betray prejudging cases. And we are trying to get some sense somehow of if there's a philosophy or, or interest that they're going to favor. So it's always a sort of a tricky thing. And in thinking through it seems like this Project 2025 is really completely upending the separation of powers and the checks and balances that we think of. Up until now, it had always seemed to me that the executive branch and the legislative branch, at least theoretically, I can conceive of a balance between that you have democratic accountability. It's always seemed to me that it's been a fundamental inherent conundrum that may be insoluble about how you can have a judiciary where you have both democratic accountability and judicial independence. And I'm just wondering that with this judiciary that seems to be doing a power grab to give the executive all this unitary power, how much is that question now about how can we ensure and try to even conceive of how we can have both judicial independence and democratic accountability, or is that now completely mooted by the fact that we're just going to have possible autocracy? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, just real briefly, let the other people in, but I think it's important to understand that we've been seeing a Project 2025 from the judiciary for about 40 years, right? I mean, the Federalist Society and a whole other group of judicial whisperers have built this bench of judges, moved them through the system, got them the right clerkships, got them onto district courts, and moved them up through the system to the extent that now we have 6 essentially Federalist Society judges on the Supreme Court. And I think it's actually a good way to look at Project 2025 because they're looking to find those same people. And instead of seating them in the federal judiciary, they want to seat them in the rest of the federal government and turn the rest of the federal government into something like the modern judiciary, at least in various areas. So, how to fix that? I mean, obviously, elections matter. We know Joe Biden has put something like 100 or maybe even more than that judges on the bench. There isn't really a dedicated effort to put, judges that have a particular bent ideologically or so forth onto the bench from the Democratic side. There is no Democratic Federalist Society, but I think that what this shows is that there's as much fragility in these other 2 branches, and so we need to be vigilant about that.
Thank you. And now Stacy's had her hand up. Stacy Dogleash from Zoom.
Actually, it's her husband, Rob.
I fell for it. Okay, Rob, go ahead.
Yeah, I just would like one of our experts to address what the far right is trying to do with the 14th Amendment and that human rights begin at conception and the implications that will have for reproductive rights and individual rights in general, because basically it's game over if they get that done.
Harold, are you there? Want to jump in?
Yeah, well, the Project 2025 was written before the Alabama courts decision against in vitro fertilization. You know, to the extent that Republicans are concerned about electability, they, I suspect, actually want to shy away from that, and the literal notion of human life beginning at conception. Barney Frank's famous crack that Republicans are pro-life until a kid is born, but not thereafter. You know, I think you know is a little far for where much, though not all, of the Republican Party goes. Of course, you know, the Republican Party has been defining itself since the 1870s and 80s by misconstruing the 14th Amendment to give rights to corporations. So, you know, in that broad historic spectrum, there's nothing surprising about twisting the 14th Amendment into conferring personhood on a recently fertilized egg. So, I mean, we need to watch for it. But you know, the fact that Republican elected officials have tended to backpedal from the logic and implications of what the Alabama court ruled suggests that you know, they know they're going too far. I mean, what's going on right now is that Republicans are trying to knock all of these ballot measures in, you know, have reached the required number of signatures to go on ballots in a number of states to codify the right to an abortion in the state constitution or in state law. They're simply trying to knock them off the ballot right now. It's you know, which is the reaction of a party that knows if people go and vote on this issue, the Republicans will lose and their position will lose. So that's the current state of play in the anti-abortion community, is just finding technicalities to knock ballot measures off the ballot.
Thanks, Art. We have time for one more question.
Yeah, what we see here, if I understand your presentation correctly, is a man who never really wanted to be president, who surrounded himself with a bunch of fools that didn't know what they were doing. I have the education thing. I mean, I'm sorry, housing and urban development. He doesn't know a thing about housing or sociology. And so my question now comes down to, well, let me add something else in that. Because if you're a judge, you still have to go to law school. And if you're a doctor, I think you have to re-up and, you know, be relicensed. And it's clear that some of these folks, I wonder if they even went to law school in the first place. So my question now to you is that what is the vetting process that you envision, you know, to see to it or to debunk a lot of this stuff, this foolishness that comes up here? And just how deep do you think this thing needs to go as far as, you know, looking at the nonsense of it and correcting it?
I really like the way you frame that question, because you know, I've sometimes thought, man, these guys should be careful what they wish for, because if they really got everything they wanted, it would be chaos, right? And, you know, we developed this system where everyone's fighting and the corporations are all fighting not to be regulated. But if you really got all the deregulation that you're asking for, everything's going to break down. You know, it's not going to work right. And so you're right that people, they don't know what they're talking about. They don't understand how this structure has been built that makes things work right. And one of the hard things about debunking it is that it is very technical, right? You know, I mean, I think at a fundamental level, they're going against a lot of things that their constituents want. But you've got to kind of get in the weeds to explain that. Like, I think it's not just a democratic value that we love having a pristine environment. We want to breathe clean air. We don't want the world to burn up. And you kind of just got to go in the weeds and say, you got to look at what they're doing. You gotta look, they're not looking out for working people. They're not looking out for families. But I think it's a great question, the way you described it. And, Trump doesn't really know anything about how the government works. And I don't think these fools do either. I think they're just a bunch of people who are spouting off and they don't really know what they're talking about. And we just have to keep trying to show that. I like the way you framed it.
All right, well, thank you so much to David, Harold, Kathy, and Amanda, and our other panelists, and of course, Congressman Falwell. Appreciate you guys. And we do have a little bit of business to continue the meeting, but before everybody leaves, so we're gonna turn it over to Lynn. We have 2 bills that we want to endorse tonight, and Lynn, you can take it from here.
Real quickly, there's 2 bills. One is Senate Bill 1374, and it's called the Net Energy Metering, and it was introduced by Senator Becker. And speaking of things that go on behind the scenes, last year, the California Public Utilities Commission took away the solar rights of renters, schools, and farms, and the CPUC blocked properties with more than 1 electric meter from using their own solar energy produced on their own roof, forcing them to buy it from the utility at full price. And so SB 1374 intends to reverse the CPU's misguided decisions. So this bill restores the ability for utility customers in multifamily apartments and in schools with on-site solar generation to be credited for self-consuming that electricity in the same way as single-family homeowners, even when the solar generation and electricity consumption are split between separate meters on the same property. So that's basically the bill, and we hope that you'll support it. The next one is AB 886, not to be confused with 866, and it is the California Journalism Preservation Act, was introduced by Assemblymember Wicks. And good journalism is suffering and its survival is threatened due to the massive ripoff by big tech companies. They sweep up valuable content written by journalists and published by news outlets and profit from it without compensation to the people who created the original work. So this bill establishes the California Journalism Preservation Act, which establishes 2 mechanisms through which digital journalism providers can obtain compensation from very large online platforms for the value of the platforms derive from accessing the digital journalism's providers' websites and other digital services. So as the president of the News Media Alliance said, now more than ever, we need accurate and reliable news and information from trusted sources to keep our communities informed and engaged. For too long, big tech has reaped windfall profits at the expense of local publications that go into the communities and hold government and other institutions to account. We look forward to publishers in California finally getting the compensation they need and deserve to be able to continue their critically important work. So that's the second bill.
Thank you. So do we have any questions on these 2 bills, or if not, do you have a motion to support them? Yeah.
Publishers like Gannett, or is it smaller publishers that we see around? Part that I skipped for time is that the funds, the journalists are protected. Money goes to like big, huge corporations like Fox News and, you know, MSNBC, all those big kind of organizations. But there is something in the bill that says the funds received will be distributed proportionately based on the number of journalists employed by each California digital news publisher. So the bill requires that at least 70% of the payment received by digital journalism providers. So that would be like Fox News or MSNBC, or 50% of small publishers be spent on news journalists and support staff. So, good question.
Yeah, Ellis. Yeah, it might be better, yeah. All right, Ellis is coming up to the mic.
Thank you, John. So back in March, we had two energy bills that we were considering endorsing, and our former mayor, Kevin McCune, astutely pointed out that it might make sense to have somebody weigh in as to whether it might affect the rate structures for the Clean Power Alliance. I'm curious if there's any impact with respect to this bill. My glance at it is that there probably aren't, but I think it's a question worth asking.
You want to come back up? Yeah, well, it doesn't matter, Eric.
I'm not an expert on it. I don't think so. And I did read that they do arbitration between the parties and they decide, you know, how much the payment will be, how much each person has to pay. So I don't think so. I didn't read anything about that.
Okay, thanks. So does anyone want to make a motion at this point? Okay, yeah, one more question. Janice is asking, sorry, go ahead. Janice is asking about the definition of California news organization. She's comparing notes with Elaine. I'm trying to narrate for the Zoom. Yeah, so it'd be anyone who publishes in California, right?
Accessible.
I mean, I don't have the answer.
It says funds received will be distributed based on the number of journalists employed by each.
They're figuring it out. Okay, thanks. Yep, Buffy Wex's bill, yeah. Okay, Susan, you had your hand up? Yeah, so Susan's moving. Phyllis? Well, hold it, sorry, we have to take is there a second? Craig seconds, okay, now go ahead. Phyllis is asking if the journalists are getting the funds, and Lennon's clarifying she did before that be 70% for larger companies and 50% for the smaller companies.
Of all the monies received from, and how much from the tech, what percentage, the whole 70% will go? Yes.
Yeah.
It's in the law.
Yeah.
Oh, it's required. And they don't have to live in California. That question.
Okay, so there's some ambiguity that Janice raised about the definition of California news organization, California journalists and so forth. I don't think we have the answer right now in this room. So with that in mind, with the motion on the table, let's take the vote. And if you're welcome to abstain or vote no, if that's a challenge for you. Yeah, let's do it separately. Yeah, Phyllis. Okay. So Phyllis is saying she doesn't think it matters whether or not they're from California. She thinks that the journalists should be compensated regardless of where they live. And Craig?
Is there a time frame and where can you go to get more information as?
Yeah, as far as where to go, there was it was in the email from today that I had linked to the bill fact sheet, so you can take a look there, and I'll include it in the email tomorrow too.
Then the question is, will we revisit this again in a month or what?
Well, we'll vote on it now, then it'll be endorsed. Okay, so all in favor? Oh, sorry, yeah. Well, Susan, what was let's just deal with what the motion was. Was your motion for both? Okay, so the motion was for both. So we can take a vote on that, or somebody could make a substitute motion if you want. Okay, so let's have the vote for both. All in favor? And I'll go to the view so we can see how many votes we have online. 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 online. Not including. Plus me, yeah.
I'm sorry, it's late.
I have 9. And 6 online, yeah. 15, okay, all opposed? Okay. Any abstentions? And 1 abstention from Janice. Okay, so the bills have been endorsed. Appreciate everybody. And now before we go, I'll just remind everybody of what's coming up. Remember, this weekend, we're canvassing for our city council candidates. By the way, last week in the Daily Press, we had a full page ad for our candidates on the back. We have a unified, I mean, not only Santa Monica Democratic Club, but Santa Monica Forward, SMER, SAPS have all endorsed the same group of candidates this time. Very exciting. So come by this weekend. Ellis is in the back of the room. He can tell you the details. And if you're watching it later on Zoom, just be in touch with the club. We'll tell you what's going on. Fundraiser for the Westside Democratic headquarters at Manchego on Main Street, August 11th. The headquarters itself will be on the promenade, the 1200 block. And we'll have a watch party when Vice President Harris accepts the nomination on August 22nd. Then we'll be open all the way until Election Day. Our next Democratic Club meeting is August 28th. We'll be endorsing or considering endorsement for all of the ballot measures: California, LA County, Santa Monica, SMMUSD. Thank you all. We're adjourned.
Good night, everybody. Good night, Annie. Yeah, John.